What's up, metalheads? Welcome to the Scrap Metal Podcast, the show for the misfits who've been listening to the same music since high school. I'm your host, John von Frankenstein, and joining me today is my metal thrashing mad co-host, Chris. Chris, I gotta ask you, man, how you feeling?
I gotta say, I'm feeling nostalgic.
Nostalgic. Isn't that the feeling everyone's longing for, right? You're just longing for the days where you could go to a McDonald's and Grimace was actually there and everything was yellow and red instead of this corporate gray. Does this feeling of nostalgia have anything to do with how you're keeping your heavy metal street cred?
You know, it just might have something to do with my heavy metal street cred, but it's going to take me a roundabout way to get there, because recently...
We've got time.
I was recently talking to a coworker about his collection of Pokemon cards, and he has been buying and selling Pokemon cards and has made a lot of money selling his Pokemon cards. But in talking about Pokemon and talking to another coworker that was there, we started talking about some of the old Pokemon video games. In particular, the Pokemon video games available on the Nintendo 64. You know, games like Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Stadium, and I still have my Nintendo 64. But I don't have any of these Pokemon games. And so I've started scouring eBay for some of these Nintendo 64 games, in addition to scouring eBay for my vintage thrash metal cassettes that I'm always looking for. So now I'll be able to buy some vintage Nintendo 64 games while listening to my vintage cassettes on my vintage boombox. And I guess that's how, in my roundabout way, I'm going to be playing Pokemon Snap while listening to Testament's The New Order on cassette.
Just as analog as you can make it.
Absolutely.
Just getting right in there. Your ad suggestions must be so fucked up. I can't imagine what your suggested page looks like.
It's lot of cassettes and a lot of Nintendo cartridges now.
I love it. I wish that I had gotten more and more into video games, but I felt like it was Super Nintendo and then that was it. And like Super Nintendo, I would just spend like all summer playing it. And I fucking loved it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Speaking of summer, how are you dealing with this fucking heat lately?
Oh, it's oppressive. It's
exactly.
Terrible.
The heat has been fucking oppressive. It's been a hate crime.
Yes.
I swear. It makes me wonder how all the goths in Vegas handled the heat during the Cruel World Festival that happened back in May. Just like... I can't even fucking imagine. My AC's been off for 3 minutes and I'm already fucking drenched. Last episode, for any of you that watched, I was in a fucking onesie, so I did it to myself. But this time, it's just Mother Nature is just trying to run me out of here.
Yep.
But seeing that lineup, I'm so glad that you brought up your feelings of nostalgia. Because seeing that lineup just stirred up feelings of nostalgia for my younger goth self, my little baby bat heart. And, you know, that was back when the heat didn't affect me so much and my metabolism still worked. And so we thought, wouldn't it be fun to dive into goth music? We'll start out with the brief history and then taking you through some of our favorites and then some of the more modern offerings. Chris, I know that this may be a very different episode for you, especially because this isn't normally the type of music that you listen to. What is your take on this goth deep dive that we're doing?
You know, initially, I was pretty excited to take this deep dive. Like any deep dive, you know, I was looking forward to maybe discovering some new music. You know, I love being able to use this podcast as an excuse to constantly search for new music and listen to new music.
Right.
Unfortunately, there was no water in the pool.
Is this a reference to the heat again?
And I had a very challenging time trying to find goth music that I actually wanted to listen to a second time.
All right. Okay. I love episodes like this. I really do, because Chris and I have a lot of very similar opinions about music. It's why we get along. It's why we became friends. But the most interesting episodes are those episodes like the nu metal episode where we're coming at it from two completely different experiences. You know, me having such a connection with that, like the goth look and the goth aesthetic when I was in my teens, and you dressing like pop punk, like skater. We're obviously coming at it from two different points, and I'm actually really happy that we're coming at it from two very different perspectives, because I loved this. This was so much fun for me. This is like, a lot of this music was already up my alley, but I got to learn about a lot of bands that I didn't know before, and that are just going to like fluff up my goth playlists now, which will have some like real goth music on there. And why don't we touch on that real quick? The phrase real goth. This is somewhat of a sticking point and a point of contention for a lot of people, a lot of goths especially. Any OG goth will tell you that goth is a music-based subculture. I tell you this because I watched about 50 fucking videos where they said the same exact thing. And now, having done this deep dive, I kind of understand what that means, but it's way more gatekeepy than our show tends to be. And in a way, I feel like it is something to do with keeping out unsavory types. A few videos that I watched talked about how, especially in the 90s, a lot of goths got lumped together with kind of like the Marilyn Manson crew. And like basically anybody that dressed alternative, they took them as like these assholes pretty much. And I know that the term real goth didn't start in the 90s, but it's just, there had to be some sort of root to it. And I feel like it's just all about protecting themselves and protecting their subculture and protecting the people within it while still being very inclusive. Like, a lot of the videos that I watched and a lot of the articles I read were applauding the inclusion of the goth subculture while also still sticking to their guns and repeating time and time again how it was a music-based subculture, not a fashion-based subculture. So it's like the only time where it's okay to kind of be like, hey, name 3 bands, I guess, is the way that they look at it. And I mean, an important thing to remember is that no matter what, and anyone that's alternative knows this, right? Whether it's wearing all black and like lace, or if you're wearing plaid and like spikes and a mohawk, everyone just thinks you're fucking emo. So it doesn't really fucking matter anyway. Chris, what was your take on that phrase, real goth?
It was interesting to see how gatekeepy it can get, but at the same time, I kind of get it. Just before we started recording, I talked about, as part of my research, I was looking for some goth Spotify playlists, and one of these Spotify curated playlists that was dark and gothic, is what they called it, was made up of like Graves era Misfits and Typo Negative. And then right next to it was a playlist called Actual Goth Music that featured all the bands that, you know, I saw in your notes and have seen other goth people suggest.
Okay.
So I kind of understand why there might be this sort of gatekeepy type of attitude in the goth community, because similar to we've talked about in the past, metalheads can get very gatekeepy, but I think goth is also used to describe anyone who's wearing all black and listens to a different style of music. I have never, and most likely never will, identify as goth, but I've been called goth, you know, because in high school I started wearing black and listening to a different style of music, and I had people ask me, "Oh, are you goth?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just wearing black.
I'm just Chris."
Yeah. No, that's just Patrick. You know? So, like, I get it when the term for your subculture is being applied to anyone and everyone wearing, even just wearing the same color. I kind of get it, but I'll save some of my other opinions for later in the episode. I don't want to aggravate everyone right off the bat.
I'm so excited.
But there's an aspect of it I get, and there's an aspect of it that I'm like, really? That's the music you're trying to keep everyone from listening to?
Okay, I'm glad that everyone is getting an idea of Chris's opinion of the music. So you would say that your idea of goth when you were younger was what? Was it informed by movies? Was it informed by people that you saw in your local alternative scene?
I think I always thought of goth as a fashion-based subculture.
Okay. Okay, that's
Gasp.
fair, because so did I. Like, it was what was easiest to identify people with, because I didn't know anyone that was listening to goth, quote unquote, real goth music.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think we can talk about, and I feel like I've seen it talked about, but we could talk about how like The Crow might inform some ideas or some of the goth
Yeah,
look.
it fucking did.
But
as this look states.
at the same time, I think as someone who listens to, you know, some punk and some thrash music, and you don't always get the most accurate portrayal in movies.
Right. Yeah.
I see someone that looks like The Crow playing this music that, much like Ghost and much like Kiss, there's a disconnect there. You don't sound the way you look. And I just I just attributed that to Hollywood not knowing what the fuck they were doing.
Right.
Not realizing that, no, this is what the music sounds like. We got it right. You just don't like it.
See, like for me, it was, yes, a lot about the movies and the fashion of it all, the aesthetics. It was the reason that I've claimed goth since I was a kid was because I liked dressing in black. That was my impression of what goth was. It was dressing in black, dressing in fishnets. I've talked about how I'm so happy now that chunky boots are coming back, because I was like, yeah, that's all I fucking wore through high school. It was fucking motorcycle boots, combat boots, and fucking platforms, because I'm fucking short. So I loved it. And, you know, when we talk about movies like The Craft, Donnie Darko, The Crow, like probably The Crow was my biggest gateway into the goth look. And so I was like, right, so if I dress like that, then that means that I'm goth. So it was enlightening to see how people that claim themselves as goth and claim the goth subculture and listen to goth music feel about that, where it's like, no, if you're not listening to the music, then you're not truly goth, which is the gatekeepy aspect that we keep talking about. And yeah, that's not like it's not my favorite part of it, but this was more so about the music. And when it comes to goth music, especially when I was younger, before doing this episode or before doing the research, I always thought of it as, you know, The Cure, 9 Inch Nails, Cradle of Filth even I took as like goth metal because you had a lot of symphonic elements to it. And pretty much anything off of the soundtrack for The Crow, which 9 Inch Nails is on there too. And probably one of the biggest bands that I connected with the goth feel was Dead Sea. We've talked about them before, and funny enough, like a couple months after doing our Cursed Bands episode where I highlighted Dead Sea and my love for them, the keyboardist announces that he's leaving the band, this reunion that they were planning. It is truly no longer the summer of Dead Sea, and I'm so sad about it. But Dead Sea did take a lot of elements of goth music and mix them in with industrial, which the two are very, very connected with their history. They both came from that place of being alternative and kind of being outsider music. And Dead Sea just melded the two together, as well as mixing in some metal within there too, especially in the vocals. I think that was the first thing that I was like, oh, so if you're a goth band, you have to sing real deep. You know what I mean? Which a lot of these bands do. And some of them don't do it as well anymore. I guess we'll get into that in a little bit. But when it came to Dead Sea, the one thing that I really latched onto was Elijah's deep, deep voice. You know, and he didn't have like a soothing quality to it. It was definitely like California Surfer Boy, but down 19 octaves. You know, and it wasn't like a band like Lebanon Hanover, which we'll get into in a little bit, where it's very much like this. It was more so like there's one song called Flowing Glower by Dead Sea, and the verse is like, now you know places where I live, and it's like very deep, but he has that like, where are you kind of fucking twinge to his voice. You know what I mean? And I'm so happy now that I feel like I have a better idea of what goth music is. Chris, besides using these playlists, did you use my notes as kind of like your guide and like your roadmap to trying to understand goth music yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It started with some of the playlists that I could find, some of the people I've seen on Instagram that have talked about goth music, following some of the bands that they suggest. As I listened to some of these playlists and realized how difficult it was for me to find something I actually liked, I ended up just looking at your notes to see, what kind of bands is John listening to. So at the very least, when he says, hey, I really like this band and this song, Chris, what did you think? I can be like, I can tell you that I didn't like it for these specific reasons because I listened to this specific song.
See, but at least you're giving me reasons and not just being like, this music fucking sucked. Take some antidepressants and fucking relax.
Yeah.
And like, goth music did not start out as the super moody, super ethereal, and echoey music that we may know it as today. There were things leading up to it. And I realized after doing our new metal episode that New British Canon is the name of the series that this gentleman does. And again, because I don't do enough research, I forgot to write down the name of his channel, but just look for his videos, because his video on, before goth was instrumental in getting my understanding of what led us there. So what he states is that bands like The Doors and the Velvet Underground and what I now know as post-punk, which I kind of thought was goth before, led us to goth proper, quote unquote, I guess you could say. And I can totally see that. A song like The End by The Doors and People Are Strange, it has that deep crooning voice from Jim Morrison and those darker themes. Like, can you kind of see the line that connects that?
Once I saw a playlist that was called something like Proto-goth, and the first song,
that's cool.
The first song was The Doors, People Are Strange, and I was like, what? And then I thought about it and I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense,
Right.
Because I do enjoy the music of The Doors, and I do enjoy, People Are Strange and some of their other songs that get played on BAB all the time. For those of you not on Long Island, BAB is a classic rock station that only plays about 15 different songs.
But that's why we love them. You know what you're in for when you're listening to BAB.
But once I started listening to some of the other post-punk and goth bands and thinking about The Doors and the sound that you get from The Doors, especially, how upfront the keyboard could be in The Doors and how electronic some of these goth bands sounded, I was like, all right, I kind of get it, that it's, I feel like The Doors were a little bit more psychedelic, and then goth took it a little bit more like moody and melancholy and like that, but I could definitely see how The Doors influenced some of these bands that would come to be known as goth bands.
Yeah. And another band that was super, super important and that you hear mentioned in every music history documentary and stuff, just everyone brings them up, the Velvet Underground. And boy, can I tell you, I was not a fan. And I kind of I kind of knew this going into it. I don't get it.
Yeah.
But what I found is that I don't like the songs that Lou Reed sings on, but I loved the songs that Nico sang on. Songs like Venus and Furs, Femme Fatale, All Tomorrow's Parties. These songs were really cool. So then I took that road and kind of went deeper into Nico's stuff. And on her Marble Index album, No One Is There, that song, that feels like a proto-goth song. And her voice is so, I don't know if she had like a German accent or some sort of European accent, and she just sounds like she doesn't care when she's singing, and I loved that. Everything was like ha 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 ha, and like, because I don't know any of the words, because again, not enough research, but But I loved finding out that it's like, oh, I do like some songs, but just not anything that Lou Reed has done. Like, if it's Lou Reed, it better just be Walk on the Wild Side, and that's it. And then the term post-punk, which just blew my fucking mind. I'd never heard this term before. To me, this was just goth music. Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, Joy Division. Again, I brought up how I just loved anything off of the Donnie Darko soundtrack, so that includes The Church, Echo and the Bunnymen, Killing Joke. All of these bands, I was like, wait, I thought this was goth music. Is this not considered goth music? And what's so fascinating is I watched one video, and this girl said, a true goth never claims goth. And I was like, okay, right. How someone's like, are you goth because you dress in Victorian dresses and lace and fishnets and, you know, you've got clown white makeup and super dark eyeliner, and they're just like, no, like I'm just dark and I'm just my own person. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. But they listen to all this fucking music, so
yeah,
there's a disconnect there. But I get it now. I mean, Susie and the Banshees is fucking great. Chris enlightened me at the fact that The Passenger is a cover of Iggy Pop and the Stooges. I did not know that, but I love that song. I love Spellbound, Cities to Dust. Like I've always liked these songs. Same goes for The Cure, Love Song, Fascination Street, 100 Years, Burn, which was on the Crow soundtrack. We should just title this episode Goth, aka songs that John listened to on the Crow soundtrack.
I'm getting flashbacks to how my punk rock Big Four songs we heard in video games. You know,
yeah, exactly.
How every single band was in a Tony Hawk video game. Every single band in our Goth Deep Dive was actually on the Crow soundtrack.
We have to start somewhere. We need our gateway somewhere, right?
Yep.
And then like Joy Division's another band that I don't get it. Love Will Tear Us Apart is one of the worst songs ever written, in my opinion. What a boring fucking song. Love will tear us apart. Like, not doing it for me. I did not like that song, but I did like Shadow Play. And, oh shit, Dead Souls. Again, another song on the Crow soundtrack. but on that soundtrack, it was covered by Nine Inch Nails. So I always knew it as that Nine Inch Nails song from The Crow. And I fucking love that song. And then I come to realize that's a Joy Division song. So proven wrong once again, thankfully. And then, you know, like Under the Milky Way by The Church, Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunnymen, and Love Like Blood and 80s by Killing Joke. Those are all really cool songs, but I always just considered that as goth. Did you sort of feel the same way? Did you go into this being like, oh, I'm just going to talk about The Cure a bunch in this episode?
Yeah, that's kind of what I expected, was like, you know, Susie and the Banshees and The Cure, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I understand to be goth.
Right.
And then I listened to it, and I'm like, this is just like moody pop music. Like
it is. It's
I don't know where post-punk comes from. You know, because it just sounded like, it sounded similar to a lot of like radio-friendly pop music from the 80s. Like some of this just sounded like Madonna's Like a Virgin. Or maybe, you know, something like that. Or maybe not so much the post-punk stuff. I think it's, as we move on, there's more bands that definitely made me think of that 80s pop music. This just sounded like, I don't know, it surprised me to listen to The Cure and hear a song like Boys Don't Cry.
Right, yeah.
And I'm like, wait, this is goth? Because so much of my thoughts on goth was thinking, oh, it's just how people dress. I assumed that people dressing that way were listening to like industrial music.
Right, yeah.
And then it turns out they're listening to pop music.
Yeah. But it makes sense as to why all of these bands denied being goth bands.
Yeah.
All of these bands were lumped into the goth genre against their will. You know, Susie and the Banshees, The Cure. The Cure had such a cool history because you've got stuff like Love Cats and Boys Don't Cry. And then you've got everything off of Disintegration and Pornography. And then they went pop again when they start doing like Love Song and stuff.
Yeah.
But to till now, they're still like, no, we're not a goth band. We are just a rock band. We are just a band. We are just writing the music that we like to hear, and it happens to be melancholy, and it happens to be very poppy and sweet at times. But I love that about it. Like, I like that even the bands that are like, wait, no, don't call us goth, they have this air of commercial appeal to them. And it's so funny when you think about the way that people who are very staunch and, you know, claim to be trad goths or traditional goths are, you know, so hard up on that label, when these bands are like, no, like Robert Smith dresses in black, teases up his fucking hair, wears red lipstick, and will sing a song like 100 Years, which is so fucking, so cool. And Fascination Street, which is so fucking cool. Like, that's, to me, a really heavy fucking song with that bass intro. But then you've also got Love Song and Boys Don't Cry. It's so fascinating. Same thing for Killing Joke. Love Like Blood is another song where it's like you've got that same sort of bass line that you get in Fascination Street. And it feels kind of heavy. And then you've got 80s, which is almost like, you know, 80s pop. And it's also where Nirvana stole the fucking bass line for Come As You Are.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first thing I noticed. I'm like, wait, this is just Nirvana. Well, Nirvana came after this, so Nirvana stole this. But yeah, it was Killing Joke. I know I liked half of the song Love Like Blood.
Okay.
And that's about as close as I got to liking something. I was surprised to see Killing Joke mixed in with goth music, because I think my only real exposure to Killing Joke is, I believe, them being name dropped in a NoFX song. And so I always thought they were like punk, not post-punk, proto-goth, whatever they are, because that song, it's called Two Jealous Agains. It's about dating a girl and realizing you both have all the same albums, and so he just names a bunch of punk rock albums that now they have two of. And he says, now we have two Killing Jokes. And I was like, oh, I guess they're a punk band. That. And then I listened to it, and I'm like, why is Fat Mike listening to this? This is not
does not compute.
Great. Yeah, this doesn't
I like that
match.
title of Proto-goth way more than post-punk, because I understand post-punk, it was after punk, but Proto-goth makes way more sense. And
yeah, but I think you can't call yourself proto something before the something exists. True. You know, proto
very
power.
Good point.
You know, it's with our power metal deep dive. It's bands like Manila Road. You can't call them proto power metal because power metal doesn't exist yet.
Right. Yeah. But from all of those bands, then we get into goth proper, or, you know, actual goth music, quote unquote.
This is where I found all the songs that sounded like Madonna.
I'm excited for you to just start checking off. Like, when raise your hand when I mention a song that you feel sounds like Madonna. I'll play a little bell or something for our podcast listeners so they know that you're raising your hand. But a lot of people credit Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus as the first true goth song, which took a lot of the elements from post-punk, the moody, atmospheric feel. You even got some like reggae-style slapback echo with the vocals, which it's so weird to think like, okay, reggae vocals gave us the typical goth vocal sound, but you can kind of see where the connection comes in. Again, another thing that I learned from the New British Canon, which I found super, super interesting. And the darker themes were like talking about Bela Lugosi, fucking, you know, the king of Universal Monsters, you know? It's like the reason that I got this glass that I'm drinking out of right now with a spider on there, you know, is because I wanted to feel like Dracula when I drink my wine. So, and Bauhaus just had this feel of this feels like darker music. This feels like music that you listen to in a dark room with dry ice, and you're dressed in all black and just kind of like dancing in place, and your arms are up, and like you're doing this like kind of like hippie dance, and that's what that song feels like. Bela Lugosi's Dead just feels like being the only person in the room dancing like that. Not dancing like Wednesday. That's not true goth. We'll just put that there. on the record. Dark Entries is really good too. Stigmata Martyr was another song that I really, really liked from them. But the band that I felt, I was like, oh, okay, now I'm like off and running with this stuff, was the Sisters of Mercy. And Black Planet, that's the first song off of their first album, was so good. I really loved it. And you get the deep vocals from Andrew Eldritch, which I know a lot of people now have been talking about on their latest tour. Like, he sounds like shit. He can't really sing that way anymore. And he's almost like whispering and just letting the two guitarists sing for him, which is, I mean, whatever. The dude smokes like a fucking chimney. What do you expect? But one thing that I want to bring up, and I don't know, because of your reaction to the music, I don't know how much you listened to it or how deep you dove into their music, but the stuff off of the first album is my favorite from them because they were a true band at that point. The guitarist and bass player wound up leaving and starting The Mission in a very, very infamous split by the band. But on this first album, it felt like an album written by a band trying to poke fun at very serious rock stars and coming out with this really moody music, which I fucking loved. Like, what was your take on the Sisters of Mercy?
I don't remember. I remember, it's like I said, I remember listening to a whole bunch of bands right in a row, and I feel like Bela Lugosi's dead.
Chris is like, skip.
Yeah,
skip.
like it's, I was listening to a song and I was trying to figure out, what does this make me think of? And I figured it out. And some of these bands that it's in, like I said, I know some of them had a more electronic sound. I seem to remember listening to one of these bands thinking, okay, it's a band. Doesn't mean I like it, but at least there's guitars being here. But like I listen to some of this and I'm like, this sounds like Take On Me by Aha. But like if you played it slow.
Yeah.
And were sad while
which
playing
I totally fucking love.
Which, like, that song's good. I mostly listen to the Real Big Fish cover, which if between last episode and this episode there's a theme now, I just listen to Real Big Fish and Third Wave Ska. But listening to this, I'm like this, and like I said, I don't remember which specific bands it was. I know I listened to Sisters of Mercy, and I know I didn't like it. But there was just something about so many of these bands that sounded like it just sounded like, and I'm going to keep saying it, sounded like 80s pop music. That's all it sounded like to me. And like, maybe that's just me being ignorant because I'm like, where's the distortion guitars? You know, where's my 250 beats per minute? So maybe that's on me, but it's just, this is all music that is the exact opposite of everything I want to listen to. Okay.
That's fair though. See, I come from a place where I love 80s pop music. So all of this stuff is they already have their foot in the door with me.
Yeah.
I tend to look for stuff like this anyway. Songs that are moody, songs that are have an ethereal feel, have a very dark feel to them. Like even in the metal that I listen to, that's why I ended up getting into Dead Sea and, Nine Inch Nails and Typo Negative. Like they all had this weird, dark, vampiric feel to them. But you take all of that and now wrap it in the beautiful package that is 80s pop music, which I fucking adore, and it's just that much more appealing to me. And like a song like Walk Away by the Sisters of Mercy, which actually it starts out with a drum fill that reminded me of the Gremlin Rag. So the first time I heard it, I was just expecting it to start da, 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 da. The theme from Gremlins, if you're not familiar with it. But that song's fucking great. And again, that is a good alternative song. We'll put it that way, I guess. It's because it doesn't feel like it's supposed to be gothy music. That's kind of what they got into as they went on, and they got into songs like This Corrosion and Dominion. Those albums, and the reason why I say that I like their earlier stuff more is because after the first album, it was just Andrew Eldritch and his drum machine, Dr. Avalanche, and like various other people that he had brought in. Patricia Morrison was on the second album, and like years later, he was like, actually, she didn't participate on any of the fucking albums. She just did a bunch of the fucking press with me. Like, she didn't even play on this. She went on to marry Dave Vanian of The Damned, and she just looks like a goth queen. Like, you think of goth woman, and that's who you envision is Patricia Morrison. But it just like later stuff from them just felt like something by one guy who was very, very stubborn and who obviously just wanted full control of a band. So that's why I tend to like more of the stuff on the first album more. I think it's called The Ribbon off of their Vision Thing album is really fucking good. You want a song with some distorted guitars. I think that would be the song for you to listen to kind of get into them. But Walk Away is a great fucking song. And it's like, again, I definitely go for those songs that have that moody feel to it. It's all about, you're asking someone, are you going to stay with me through this thing or are you going to walk away from me? Which apparently was written about the way that he felt about the rest of the band. And then they wound up fucking breaking up. So I guess he was right.
Yeah.
And then the song No Time to Cry, I think I might have brought it up at some point in the past. My first time hearing that song was a Cradle of Filth cover. And so when I started doing my research and I heard the bass line, the bass intro to this song, I was like, wait a minute, I know this. Like, why do I know this? I know this bass line. I start singing it and I'm like, I'm singing the words. I'm like, where the fuck do I know this from? And then I realized it was Cradle of Filth. So any true goths that are listening to this right now are fucking cringing. I'm so sorry. But that's the frame of reference that I had before doing this deep dive. You can't be mad at me about this. My exploration with Sisters of Mercy then led me to the Clan of Zymox, who is so fucking cool. I really liked them. Similar feel. Their song A Day is great, and it has like, I don't know if it's distorted guitar in the intro or if it's like distorted keyboard, but the song A Day is really good. Cry in the Wind was great. Backdoor was awesome. And Masquerade was another real standout song. They had a ton of stuff that I dove into. And for the last couple of weeks while we were researching this episode, I would continue going back to them. They were definitely one of the bands that I kept revisiting. Their song Jasmine and Rose as well as another standout. Shit, man, I really wish that you had fucking dug these bands way more than you did. But but I get it because you're coming at it from a perspective of, like you said, you'd almost think that goths are listening to more industrial.
Yeah.
And like I said, their subcultures were so linked because especially in like the 80s and 90s when you were going to a goth night, it was usually a goth industrial night. So you had some crossover there. And there were some industrial bands that I listened to, but maybe possibly doing an industrial episode in the future that Chris will like a little bit more. And yeah, just that, like, there were definitely some bands that had a bit of a harder edge to them, like Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone's song Adrenaline was definitely a little bit heavier. And Eye for the Main Chance, People as well are some really cool songs. And they definitely had some of the heavier stuff that I was listening to. Adrenaline sounds like, not to play into your point, but what is that song? Oh, shit. I think it's by the Bangles. Baby, I'm ready to go. It sounded kind of like that. It's like this real fast, like, drum loop, and then, like, heavier vocals and heavier guitars. And you don't get a lot of growling in goth music. No. But I think with Rosetta Stone and Fields of Nephilim, you did get some growling in there. Their song Moonchild was really cool. And I was just surprised to hear that because I was not expecting to hear any growls or any harsher sounding vocals in any of the music that I checked out. Can you remember any songs or bands that you listened to where you were like, okay, this is kind of surprising me because it's closer to what I normally listen to?
So one thing I do want to point out is that Rosetta Stone, Adrenaline, I remember listening to. But here's the reason why I remember listening to it.
Okay.
He was pronouncing adrenaline like adrenaline. Like as if it was some sort of fucking drug.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, am I having a stroke and don't remember how adrenaline is spelled or pronounced? And so, like, that's what I remember about Rosetta Stone. I think there was another song I listened to that, like, it sounded okay, but I had a rough time.
I'm so happy you're honest though.
Because you know what? Like, because even if there was something that did stand out to me, it didn't stand out enough for me to be like, yeah, I liked this. I made a note of how much I liked this. I think so much of it got mushed together, and so I don't know which bands it was, but some of these bands sounded like, Flock of Seagulls. Like it might have actually been some of like the modern bands that are like really leaning into an 80s goth sound.
Yeah.
I was listening to it and I'm like, this is just I Ran So Far Away by Flock of Seagulls. Which is
another fucking song that I love so much.
I mean, it's a good song. It gives me the nostalgia of seeing the Grand Theft Auto Vice City commercials on TV and playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City. But
bringing it back around.
Yeah,
Okay.
But it was definitely, it's not something... Like, if the song comes on, I'll be like, oh, I know this song. It's not bad. Yeah, but I'm not going out of my way to listen to it.
Yeah, right? Who does that?
What kind of freak who listens to the worst styles of music would possibly want to go out of their way to listen to a band with the ridiculous hairstyle that people just call that a hairstyle after the band? I heard of them because of the line from Weird Al's epic Albuquerque, where he talks about a guy who comes up to his hotel room that he describes as a big fat hermaphrodite with a Flock of Seagulls haircut and only one nostril. And he breaks into Al's hotel room and steals his Lucky Lucky autographed snorkel, and they wrestle over it. And that's where
I'm so glad that this playlist is going to have Weird Al Yankovic on it.
And that's where I first heard the phrase Flock of Seagulls. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean? And it was, that's the name of a band who had a stupid haircut, so they named the stupid haircut after the band.
I mean, place and time. It was a different time, right? We've all done stupid shit. Look at me right now. With the eyeliner and fucking... This isn't even lipstick. I just used the eyeliner on my fucking mouth. I'll probably get some disease in the future. But one band I was super, super surprised, speaking of industrial music, one band I was super surprised to see lumped in here was Ministry.
Yeah.
And I did not know that Ministry's first album was basically just an album by The Cure. And it is so funny to me how much Al Jurgensen hates this first album. A lot of these bands whose first albums felt a little bit more commercial, like later on in their careers, all of them would do interviews and be like, yeah, no, our first album, like the label made us do that. And it was like, we really fucking hated it, but the label wanted us to do it. And it's like, blah, 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 blah. But then you watch any footage of them performing and they look like they're having the time of their fucking lives. Al Jurgensen back in the day on their first album, he looked like he was in fucking Dixie's Midnight Riders with the band that sings Come On Eileen.
Dixie's Midnight Ride or something like that.
Yeah.
It's another third wave ska reference. I love Save Ferris's cover of Come On Eileen. Phenomenal cover.
This playlist is going to be so fucked up.
Good luck,
Russell's
Russell.
going to have such a good fucking time. But yeah, Ministry's first album, Al Jurgensen is singing with a fake British accent. It sounds like an album by the 1975, who I also fucking love, but like as if it had come out in the 80s. And that was fascinating to me because I like Ministry.
Yeah.
But getting to hear him singing on a song, I wanted to tell her, da, 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 da. Like, it's awesome. Work for Love is a straight up, that's a Madonna song. Like, there's like a guitar part. It's like da 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 da. Work. Like, I'm like waiting for someone to come out and start fucking voguing and shit. And like, yes, it feels so poppy and so 80s, and I love it. And it's so funny that he hates it so much. And I guess I understand, when a record label is like, hey, we need you to do this stuff first. And then eventually the band gets enough clout and enough of a following where they can be like, okay, here's what we actually wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's not to say that stuff doesn't happen, but it's just, it's such a good album. It's like, that can't happen by accident. That doesn't happen at gunpoint. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive, but I wanted to tell her, Work for Love, Every Day is Halloween. Such good fucking songs off of this first album that sounds nothing like the rest of their catalog. And there was another song, the line was stuck in my head for days. He's like, you left without saying goodbye. And he sings, you never wished me fare thee well. And that part was just on loop in my fucking head. I would go to sleep at night and that was the last fucking thought I had. And it was just so funny to me. We talked about Ministry last episode. Like, I know that, you know, like, they're heavier, like No W and New World Order. So I want you to go back and listen to New World Order and then listen to Work for Love. And it's just two completely different bands.
I feel like at some point, you know, knowing that I loved the song No W off the album Houses of the Moly, and I know I've gone back and listened to, like, you know, Jesus Built My Hot Rod. I feel like at some point I listened to this album like, oh, let's see what Ministry sounded like on their first album, because I'll do that with so many bands, because I've experienced the opposite of some of the things you're talking about, where a band's first album is who the band actually is.
Okay.
And then their second and third album, you know, Sugar Ray is my favorite example of that.
Yeah.
AFI does that. Even Sum 41, their first album is different from their second and third albums. So I remember, you know, at some point being like, hey, this fucking industrial band, Al Jorgensen, let's see what he sounded like on his first album. And I probably played one of these songs and I was like, is this the same Ministry?
Yeah.
I
was convinced it was a different fucking band.
Did someone else called Ministry come out with this album and Spotify fucked up and put them together? Should one of these be like Ministry UK and like something like that? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. That's exactly what I thought. I was like, there's absolutely no fucking way that Al, we are Antifa Jurgensen sang, you know, like the poppiest fucking song. It's great. The album's called Revenge. Anyone that's listening right now, anyone that's watching on YouTube, please go out and stream this album. We need for him to see a spike in the fucking downloads and to be like, what the fuck are people doing? One band that had definitely a darker edge to them and more of like the vampiric, you know, darker, moodier, totally what you would think of when you think of goth feel to them was London After Midnight. Holy shit, do I fucking love this band now. They quickly, like, they're another band that I just kept fucking going back to. And their first album is probably my favorite, but the first song that I heard from them was the song Kiss. And I think it was like the club mix that they have. It's on their second album, Psychomagnet. God damn, that's a good fucking song. It has an industrial feel to it, but it's just like, okay, where the other bands I was talking about before make you want to dance alone in the middle of a room with a fog machine, this makes you want to dance in like a sweaty fucking like the club from The Matrix.
Yeah.
Or like the vampire rave at the beginning of Blade. Like, that's what I want to listen to while I'm in the fucking blood rave, is London After Midnight. Their song Your Best Nightmare starts out and it sounds like a fucking Cradle of Filth song. It has like really bad synth strings and it's so good. Their song Sacrifice, which was so I played their first album for my wife. We were driving upstate and I was like, I need you to listen to this because I need to make a point about it. And I played the song Sacrifice and I was like, anyone who ever thinks like, oh, I wonder what someone who's just unbearably pretentious and like constantly talking about how dark their life is listens to, it would be this song. And it just, she's like, yeah, no, I get it. It's exactly what you would think of when you think of someone who listens to goth music. And I say that as if it's a bad thing, but it's so good. It does start out and sound very similar to It's Raining Men. And I cracked up the first time I heard it. I was like, did something get fucked up with this album? It's like where Ministry, I was listening to it and I was like, this definitely isn't the same band. I was like, this definitely isn't the same album that's on right now. I thought it was about to start, it's raining men. Listen to the intro of that song and tell me I'm fucking wrong. I dare you. Their song Kiss was great, like I mentioned. The song Psychomagnet, Love You to Death is great as well. I just had so much fun with them. And I was so surprised to learn as well that when it comes to the whole aesthetic versus music-based subculture thing, their bass player in the early years was like a supermodel for a goth magazine. And he's like the prettiest goth dude you'll ever see. Jawline, like it would cut, like charcuterie board, use his fucking jawline. And it's... I don't know if that joke works or not. But he was like so pretty, like supermodel dude, but he played bass for this band. And it's like, you can't tell me that the fashion and the music were not so linked at the beginning that you get mad at people when they're like, oh, I dress goth, therefore I am goth, even though I don't listen to the music. Because like, I doubt that this guy was listening to any of these other bands. He was probably like, yeah, you need me to play bass? Sure. I think he played with them for like 2 years. And it's just, his name is John Koviak. So if you want to look him up and you'll see what I mean, you're going to fall in love. He's a very pretty guy. But yeah, London After Midnight was just quickly one of my favorites. I think I might have even brought them up to you where I was like, you got to fucking listen to these guys.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was to me or I saw it in like your Instagram story or something, but I know
that might have been it.
I saw you like falling in love with this band and I'm like, oh boy, I'm going to rain on his parade,
I mean, how on theme.
I remember listening to Sacrifice and like it's like you're saying, I do remember I saw your note starts off like it's raining men and I hear the rain. I'm like, all right, I kind of get it. But like it's
the chords too. Yeah, it's the rain and it's the chords that come in afterwards. And I'm just waiting for, boy, do we got news for you. But yeah, that just made me fucking laugh. And then I brought them up before, but the Mission, so they came from the remnants of what was the Sisters of Mercy. It was the guitarist and the bass player. Wayne Hussey, I think the guitarist's name was. And I don't remember the bass player's name. But the song Burning Bridges, obviously a real, like, fuck you to Andrew Eldritch, I guess. Stay With Me is really good. I know that one of their albums was actually produced by John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin. So that was really interesting. But the song Wasteland was really funny to me because in one interview, Andrew Eldritch talked about how he wasn't intimidated by these guys starting their own band because he's like, they just say words. He just looks through a dictionary, strings words together that sound deep, and that's the music that he writes. And sometimes that works. Like on a song like Burning Bridges, that works. But on a song like Wasteland, I was like, oh, he really is just putting phrases together. Like just saying shit that sounds like it's supposed to be deep. And I know that it was that feeling that then prompted Andrew Eldritch to write This Corrosion. The song This Corrosion, even the chorus of Sisters of Mercy's This Corrosion is like it sounds like a stupid poppy song. Like, hey now, now. And it was supposed to be like, oh, you're corroding the fabric of what is music. At least that's what I've read. I don't fucking know. Like, who knows if any of this stuff is real? And with my track record of research, who really knows? But I loved that there was that, like, a lot of these bands do have very introspective lyrics and do have very, like, deep themes, to me at least. And so it was funny to hear one band who'd kind of been called out for just trying to act like they're deep and me catching that finally and being like, oh shit, he was fucking right. Did you expect a lot of these bands to have female singers in them?
I'm not sure. I think I might have expected more female lead singers since one of the first bands introduced was Susie and the Banshees.
Right.
So I thought maybe there would be some more female lead singers or female vocalists, but pretty quickly when I realized everyone seemed to just be doing like the deep vampire voice, I was like, oh, so there's not going to be women doing this because everyone is trying to do their deepest, darkest voice possible.
Yeah. I love it. But for that exact reason, I was really happy to find Die Laughing, and finding them prompted me to do exactly that. I saw the name Die Laughing and I was like, of course you're a fucking goth band. But I listened to them and I was like, okay, why do I dig this so much, but I can't stand Evanescence? And I was very surprised to ask myself that question. So I went back and I listened to Evanescence and I still don't like it. So Die Laughing, their song Glamour and Suicide is great. Their song Heaven, In Chimera's Shadow, all really, really cool songs with a female lead vocalist. And I actually had to dive in a little bit more to see if she was who sang on Cradle of Filth's Nymphetamine song. Turns out wasn't the same person, but their voices are super, super similar. And again, as is my trademark, I didn't write down what her name is, but you can listen to Die Laughing and laugh at my lack of preparation. And but I really like them, and I feel like this was, again, one of those bands where it's like when you think of what you would expect a goth to listen to, it would totally be Die Laughing, because it was she has a really beautiful, like, operatic almost voice, and they also have some like distorted guitars in their music as well. Just really, really good stuff. I really dug them. One of the last bands that I dove into from like this 80s and 90s like goth proper period was the band The Wake and their song Nazarene. That was a really cool song, kind of an outlier. I forget where I found it. I might have found it on someone's goth playlist, but that was another standout song, which does bring us to, as Chris was mentioning before, the modern goth bands. And when we say modern, I guess it's like really 2000s. I guess anything from 2000s onward would be modern goth. But you pointed out the fact that these bands really lean into the electronic aspects.
Yeah.
And I found that really funny when you consider the fact that so many of the bands prior to this were like, no, we're not goth. We don't label us goth. All of these bands are like, we are a goth band. and they own it, and they love playing that up. And I loved the duality there of the bands that came out that kind of created and laid the foundation for the genre were like, no, do not lump us in. Don't pigeonhole us. We just want to write this music, and it just happens to have these darker, moodier, more melancholy tones to them. Whereas the more modern bands are like, we fucking love those guys. Yeah, they're all goth bands. Fuck whatever they say. Like, we're doing exactly that, but then also adding in the elements of like dance music and a lot of like retro wave, which I really fucking love too. Again, go figure. Which is like very 80s influenced. Like if you think of 80s video games, if you think of like any Steven Seagal movie, the scene where he's about to go fight the dudes in the warehouse, it's the music that plays over the scene of him getting ready. So Chris, now we're getting into the bands that lean way more into that 80s kind of vibe. Were these the bands that you disliked the most, or was it just like overall you were like, I cannot get into this stuff?
I think it was more so of just overall I'm having trouble getting into this, but I think these bands were the bands that were like the worst offenders. You know, like these were the bands that were like, oh, this is bands that are, hey, we love goth, we're going to call ourselves goth. These are the bands that are confirming for me that I do not like goth music and I will never like goth music.
See, now I thought that you would have actually really dug a lot of the bands in this episode because I know you like Him, and it's not to say that Him is a goth rock band, but they have like similar elements at times. It does tend to be like some moodier rock music and even some AFI. Yes,
because when I did like a wider search, instead of just on Spotify, just kind of doing a wider search of what other bands kind of get lumped in as goth, because I was like, let me find something. I need something to talk about. I can't spend an hour just shitting on an entire subculture. And yes, a band like Him showed up in some goth playlists or is considered like goth love songs.
Right.
But I think him, particularly the songs I really like from him, are very much distortion guitar based and very much like straight ahead rock music.
Right.
And I think it touches just enough of the things that I like in music that I can really get into a band like him versus some of these other bands. You know, even a band like Typo Negative, I feel like I'm liking more now than maybe I would have. But again, it's the things that I thought goth was. Like I was like, Peter Steele had that deep voice, and with songs like "Love You to Death," and you know, Black Number One, it has that vampire romance aspect of goth that we've
talked about it before, the like the Anne Rice type of vampire, you know, romantic feel.
Even AFI got into that with, you know, The Art of Drowning. They have that vampire goth rock sound. And that's the goth music I like, because him gets lumped in with goth, but they're like, the fuck you talking about? We're not goth. But like there are goth people that like him. There are goth people that like Vil Vallo, the lead singer of him. He's got a solo project now that is more electronic him.
Right.
So like a song like Echolocate Your Love is okay, but it's missing some of the things that I love about like Razorblade Romance and love metal from him. I'm someone who, if I'm listening to music, I like hearing guitar-based music. Now, I enjoy uses of keyboards and some electronic elements. You know, I love the power metal that has keyboards, and I love some of the stuff that Ghost is doing now with keyboards.
Right.
But I still like my music to be guitar-based. And when some of these bands are too electronic, or some of these bands are guitars not really sounding like guitars, like it's very much a clean guitar with a lot of effects on it, I have trouble getting into that style of music.
Okay, that's fair. I get that. So let's dive into these bands that you hate. But no, I understand where you're coming from, where it's like, and that's completely fine to say. We've always said that the objective of this show is to open up our minds and to find new music that we want to listen to. But when we find stuff that we dislike, to be able to explain why, to be able to say, hey, this is why I don't like this music. This is why I wasn't able to latch onto it. And not just like the blanket statement of like, this music fucking sucks.
Yeah. Like I could do that. I could just be like, you know, you're like, oh, and this song was amazing. I'm like, John, you're wrong. That sucked. It's like, well, Chris, what about this song? This song was great. It's like, also sucked. It's like, yeah. And then there was this other song. Worst fucking song I've ever heard in my entire life. It's like, no, that's not. I've grown out of that.
Right.
And you know, like we've said, I've learned to use my words. But I've learned how to, it's because of the amount of music I'm listening to and because of the amount of new music I'm discovering, I am learning more about my own tastes in terms of playing styles, uses of instruments, even singing styles. You know, so by doing 50 plus episodes of this podcast, I have learned how to verbalize my feelings inside on why I think this music sucks.
And I'll try and do the same to talk about why I love these bands. Like a band like Drab Majesty, who my friend Amanda introduced me to these guys. And it was kind of like, hey, we both love Dead Sea. You should check these guys out. So I checked them out, and the first song I listened to was Dot in the Sky, and I was like, holy shit, this is fucking great. Because it does lean into the 80s aspects and the synths and the really spacey sounding guitars. Because you're right, a lot of these bands, the guitar is there as an instrument to add ambience to the music. You're not talking about, they're not doing riffs, they're not like breakdowns.
No.
You know, most of them. And they are more of those clean, heavily compressed tones with a lot of chorus or like vibrato or, you know, delay and reverb on them. So everything just sounds like you're playing in this fucking cathedral.
Yep.
And Drab Majesty exemplifies that perfectly. Their songs Dot in the Sky, 39 by Design. I listen to that song constantly. I play it in the showroom sometimes. And like one of the guys came in once and was like, can you change this? I'm going to kill myself. I was like, I appreciate your honesty. Thanks. And sorry.
Can I meet that guy?
Too Soon to Tell, The Other Side. Those are other great songs by them. And I feel like another band that kind of really leans into the electronic side of things is the band Ultrasun. I found them through TikTok, and I'm so happy I did. Their song Keep Your Eyes Peeled. It's from the TikTok audio, and it's like, hello, it's me again. It's like, it was something like that. That's all I had to hear, and I was like, immediately fucking downloading this. That song is great. The song Set Yourself on Fire. A lot of these modern bands too kind of take what Andrew Eldritch did with Sisters of Mercy after the first album, and it's like a lot of them are like drum machine, and then one of the band members is on keyboard, or one of them's on like a bass, and the other one's on guitar or keyboard, and it's just them two playing with a drum machine. And it's fascinating to me how you've just got so many duos within this genre. So Ultrasun is one of those. She Passed Away is another band that's, I think they're German. Their song Ritual is really cool, but I loved them. And speaking of duos, one of the most fun duos that I found was Lebanon Hanover. I love them so much because of how goofy the song Kiss Me Until My Lips Fall Off is. Oh, I was so giddy when I found this song, because the first song I heard from them, again from TikTok, was Gallow Dance. And that song is it's a duo. It's a guy and a woman. And the female lead singer in Gallow Dance is singing, again, very much like Nico, very much that, you know, do with me the gallow dance, and like a deep female voice. And I'm like, oh, this sounds so fucking lovely. I love it. And then I'm like, oh, Kiss Me Until My Lips Fall Off. That sounds like a really cool, moody, romantic song. Yeah. And his voice is so fucking goofy, and I love it so much. It takes the deep, deep goth guy voice, and the way he's singing makes it sound really funny. He's singing, like, he goes into it, and I can't remember the words for the verse as usual, but the chorus goes, kiss me until my lips fall off, kiss me until I start to rot. And I was like, this is so funny. I fucking love it, and I can't stop listening to it. And it's such a good fucking song. So yeah, I had them, another band that I just had on constant fucking loop. Probably in the running for second deepest voice, or maybe first deepest voice behind this guy, is the singer for Oh Children. I am so sad that they haven't put out any music since like 2014, 2015. Holy shit, these guys are really fucking good. And their song Dead Disco Dancer, the first song I heard from them was Ruins. And I was like, oh, this is a really cool, like, heavy hitting song. Let me listen to the rest of it. And I was like, oh, this is just goth music. Like, now I understand what goth music is. Their song Radio Waves is great, and Dead Disco Dancer is really, really good. And I'm so upset that they really haven't put out all that much more music since like 2014 or 15. Castle Beat is another band that was really good. Another TikTok find. Their song Looking for Something. I found a lot of these songs off of TikTok, I'll be honest. And I've said it before, I'm not fucking ashamed of that. Like, it's just another avenue to find music on. So whatever, judge me if you want. Vestron Vulture is another band that I found through TikTok, and their song Judas Effect is really cool. But Vandal Moon I found through another user on TikTok, just like posting about their newest album. And I forget the title of that one, but their album Black Kiss is really fucking good. So like Black Kiss, Young, Deadly, Beautiful, Queen of the Night, those are all really, really great songs. Sweet Disaster, Dead, Hurt. These are all like songs that you would expect to be goth songs because of their titles, and just a lot of fun to listen to. And this band, like I could, just based off of what you were saying, I'm almost certain that you disliked Vandal Moon because they were more so straight ahead leaning into that like retro wave kind of what's called dark wave, as I've learned, like synth-based goth music. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that this was one of the bands that you've disliked right off the bat.
Yeah, I remember looking at Vandal Moon like 5 minutes before we started recording, and I was listening to them, and I was like, yep.
More of the same.
Yep. I don't know what I expected.
See, now, when it comes to I don't know what I expected, and just having your expectations completely shattered, the band Depresión Postmortem was a complete, like, shock to find. Again, found them on TikTok. But it was the cover of Yo Voy, which is a, like, reggaeton classic. Like, I do not like reggaeton, but they took this song, Yo Voy, which I think was probably by Daddy Yankee. I don't know. And they turned it into a goth song. So it's like they're singing it in Spanish. It's got the keyboards and it's got the drum machine and it's got the clean guitars. And I was like, this is really fucking good. And it's just hysterical to me that they took a reggaeton song and they turned it into goth music. And then I was like going through the rest of their catalog, and they've done that with a lot of like Spanish club songs, I guess, like Spanish dance songs. And then I got up to their cover of The Cure's Love Song, which is sung all in Spanish. And I was like, this is my personality now. Like, just Hispanic goth is my personality now. I was just so happy to see some representation from the Hispanic community in there. Because, like, I mean, there may be an episode in the future where we talk about this a little bit more, but the Hispanic culture loves alternative music so much, like rock and metal and death metal and power metal. Like anytime you see Iron Maiden performing in Brazil, they're just going fucking nuts. And just to see them doing this goth music just got me really excited. I really loved that little bit of representation there. And yeah, it's just something that I was not expecting to hear at all. after listening to a lot of bands where I was like, oh, okay, a lot of this fits in with what I've been listening to so far, and this is kind of what I expected. So to hear reggaeton turned into, you know, Susie and the Banshees was really fucking cool. So now, being at the end of this exploration of the goth genre, I feel like I have a better handle on the music itself, on the writing styles, on the different bands and the impact that they had, especially on modern goth music. And it kind of brings me back to that point that we were making at the beginning, the gatekeepiness behind the goth community. And I guess it's sort of in a way where metalheads, we are welcoming of all, but there are definitely gatekeepers within the metal community.
Yep.
And it's almost as if to say, like, we want to make sure that if you're listening to this music, that you really understand it. Sure, you can have your fun with it and you can kind of dip your toes, but if you're going to claim to be a metalhead, we want to know that you get what that means. We want to know that you appreciate the bands that came before and that have brought us to the point where there are such amazing metal bands. From that perspective, I can kind of see the reason for wanting to gatekeep the music and the community a little bit, as long as that's where it ends. As long as it doesn't become a thing of like quizzing people and like trying to fucking, you know, just stonewall them and not letting someone grow, not letting someone have their introduction to the subculture and the genre and the community. Chris, what's your take on all of that?
I think it's very similar to how you're seeing it, is that as metalheads, yes, we're used to the metalhead way of gatekeeping, where we're told we're not listening to the right metal music, or we're telling people they're not listening to the right metal music. But thankfully, there's such a large part of the fandom that is very welcoming. And if you're listening to the Metallica songs that suck, you have someone to tell you, listen, if you like their worst music, you're going to love their best music. So where as we have those kinds of people helping us in our community and in our subculture, we try to do the same for other people. And like we've talked about, the portrayal of metalheads in movies or TV shows maybe aren't always the most accurate, or they're always cast as like the bad guy.
Right.
So I get why there might be some gatekeeping for those reasons. But when it comes to goth music, and gatekeeping goth music. I've been saying it this whole episode. All these songs just sound like pop songs to me. And my initial reaction to realizing how gatekeepy the culture can sometimes be was like, it was started by people who saw the way punks and metalheads were dressing and were like, I want to look like that, but I don't want to listen to that music. That music's way too aggressive for me. These bands are playing a style of music that is like a half step down from radio-friendly pop music, so it sounds just alternative enough that not everyone is going to like it, but I like it because it's similar enough to pop music. So it's my excuse to dress alternative and claim an alternative style of music without actually having to listen to an alternative style of music. And that was my initial reaction and initial idea. And I feel like that was almost like a gatekeepy attitude that I was taking, where it was, oh, well, you're just like, you don't want to commit to actually listening to the music that the fashion is associated with. You just want to listen to your pop music and dress like it. And instead, I start to think of it as, you know, I look at someone like yourself who you love this goth music and you'll call yourself goth and you'll dress goth, clearly. But I also know that you'll listen to thrash and you'll listen to deicide and you'll listen to these extreme styles of music. So this isn't the only style of music you listen to. You listen to other styles of music that also have an alternative look to them. And so I start to think of goth as almost like a gateway subculture, because you take that first step off the path that is mainstream music. You take that first step of hearing something that's a little bit moody, a little bit melancholy, and it's a reason for you to start dressing alternatively. And if people that listen to goth music also listen to thrash, or also listen to industrial, or also listen to death metal, they can be like, well, hey, I started off liking these goth bands that you like. You might like these other bands that I also listen to. And it's I compare it to how I became punk by listening to Sum 41. I heard Sum 41. I heard Green Day, you know, these pop punk bands. Mm-hmm. And then on my search to find heavier, faster punk, I find a band like NoFX, who's coming out at the same time, but is more punk. And then I'm introduced to bands like the Ramones, like the Sex Pistols, like Black Flag, like the Misfits. And I start listening to punk proper. And so without taking that first step, I never would have gotten to punk. And I think goth can be the same kind of way, where it can be that gateway. But I think because the style of music, again, in my opinion, isn't very different from radio-friendly pop music, there almost feels like there needs to be gatekeeping. Otherwise, the people that listen to radio-friendly pop music are just going to start listening to this or trying to infringe on our thing. And it feels like they're gatekeeping because they feel like that's just the thing they should do. Or maybe the first person who started gatekeeping was like, hey, I want to dress like a punk. And a punk was like, well, you don't listen to punk, so you're not allowed to dress that way. And they were like, well, then I'm going to start my own subculture. And it's going to be a shitty style of music.
That's interesting, though, because one of the avenues and YouTube channels that I went down on the exploration to understand the subculture itself a little bit more was Angela Benedict's YouTube channel. And she talks a lot about how the rave subculture kind of killed the goth subculture, like club-wise, in New York. How goth clubs that would play goth music on goth night started playing a couple of rave songs, and then like the rave kids started to show up, and so you had like your goths, and then you had like the ravers with like the furry boots and the glow sticks and shit, and then next weekend comes around and now you've got the goths and a couple more ravers, and now you're getting a little bit more rave music on your goth nights. And it got to the point where it was the goths showing up to goth night, which was now a majority of the rave scene was showing up to the goth clubs. They were catering with the DJs more and more to the rave crowd, and suddenly the goths were pushed out. And then the rave scene just took over the goth club scene
Yeah.
in New York. So yeah, from that perspective, I get it. Yeah, you may want to be a little gatekeeping about it, but that's obviously a shitty case where like certain people got pushed out because one other style just brought in more business, maybe.
Yeah.
But I totally get where you're coming from as in regards to if you don't start here, like everyone needs their stepping stone.
Yeah.
So if you're starting with a music that may not be like your favorite style.
Yeah.
At the very least, now that person has the opportunity to either say, you know what, I'm diving full into goth music, or I started out with goth and then I still love this music, but now I also love all of these other genres that I got to explore, which I never would have gotten to had I not started out with goth music.
Yeah.
Chris, as with any of our deep dives, this episode was a lot of fun. I feel like we both learned so much, whether we liked the music or not. I feel like we both learned so much about goth as a subculture and as a genre of music, getting to explore the bands that came before, the bands that were considered as goth proper, and then modern goth. And with that, Chris, why don't you give us your suggestion for this episode? I bet it's going to be a ska band. Isn't it?
Almost. It almost was a ska band. But much like getting through so many of the bands today, coming up with a suggestion was a challenge.
Okay.
And I decided that the band I'm going to suggest is the band Typo Negative. And their album,
Yes.
October Rust from 1996. Typo Negative is a band that, upon really hearing them, like I'd heard of them.
Right.
And then, here's a name I haven't said in a while, Elizabeth from The Charismatic Voice reacted. She reacted to Love You to Death. And I was like,
Such a good song.
all right, let me hear this song while seeing Elizabeth react to it. And I fell in love with that song. And that's off of this album, October Rust. And I think Love You to Death is a song that is what I thought a lot more goth music would be, because it kind of had this vampire romance that we've talked about before, like Anne Rice romance to it.
Yeah.
And you could imagine Peter Steele being a fucking vampire.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's kind of what I expected. And I know Typo Negative is almost considered like goth metal, which I guess is the closest I'll get to listening to goth music. So that's why I'm recommending this album, October Rust. Some other songs off of this that I liked were Green Man. My Girlfriend's Girlfriend is a good song. I was also a fan of the song In Praise of Bacchus, or Bacchus. I'm not sure. But yeah, this was an album that the song Love You to Death got me to start listening to this album, and I really enjoyed it. So that's why I'm suggesting everyone go check out Typo Negative and their 1996 album, October Rust.
I love Peter Steele so much, and just like his whole vampire look.
Yeah.
You know, you're so right. And he had a huge wooden stake. So my suggestion for this episode is a band that I found through the research that I did and the curiosity surrounding these duos that we find in goth music. And that is the band Twin Tribes. Oh man, these guys are so fucking good. I've talked already about how I love it when the Spanish subculture gets to meld with alternative subcultures, and they have a song called Fantasmas, which is so good. The verses are in English and the chorus is in Spanish, and it's so good. I really, really love it. But some other standout tracks from them are the song Shadows and The Vessel. So that's why my suggestion this episode is the band Twin Tribes. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Scrap Metal Podcast. The time has come for us to pack up our gear, but we'll be back to rock out with you in the next episode.
Stay metal, everyone.
Good night!